They were not born into legend. No prophecy circled their cradles, no songs were written for their names. They were shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, laborers, people whose lives moved quietly, marked by routine and modest dreams. History, however, has never asked permission before knocking on ordinary doors. The morning it began felt no different from any other. The sun rose without ceremony, casting familiar light on streets that had seen the same footsteps for decades. Children argued over bread crusts. Old men unfolded newspapers. Women swept doorways clean of yesterday's dust. Nothing in the air warned them that this would be the day their lives would bend into something larger than themselves. Aisha had always believed destiny belonged to others. She worked in a small textile shop, her hands trained to fold fabric into neat, obedient lines. Her world was measured in meters of cloth and the slow ticking of the wall clock. That morning, she paused at the doorway, watching smoke curl in the distance. It wasn't unusual. Factories coughed smoke all the time, but something in her chest tightened, as if the future had exhaled too close to her face. Across town, Daniel tightened the straps of his worn boots. He was a bus conductor, the kind of man people forgot the moment they stepped off the vehicle. He remembered faces, though, every tired worker, every anxious student. He liked knowing where people were going, even if he never went far himself. When the radio crackled with broken sentences and rising panic, he felt the ground beneath his certainty begin to shift. At the edge of the city, old Samuel locked the door of his modest home. He had survived wars, shortages, and the slow erosion of hope that time brings. He believed he had seen everything worth seeing. Yet when the sirens screamed, sharp, urgent, unforgiving, he knew this sound did not belong to memory. It belonged to now. Panic does not arrive all at once. It trickles in through whispers, glances, rumors carried faster than truth. Streets filled with people who suddenly had no destination. Shops shuttered halfway. The familiar turned strange, like a dream that refuses to make sense. No one told them to be brave. No leader stood on a platform to give them words worth remembering. And yet, in the chaos, something ancient stirred. Not courage born of heroism, but courage born of necessity. Aisha found herself running toward the smoke, not away from it. She didn't understand why. Her legs moved before her thoughts caught up. Inside a collapsed building, she heard cries, small, frightened, human. She tore fabric from her own inventory to bind wounds, her hands trembling but steady enough to save a life. In that moment, she was no longer a shopkeeper. She was a lifeline. Daniel stopped his bus in the middle of the road and opened the doors. "Get in," he shouted, though he had no idea where he would take them. People climbed aboard, clutching strangers, trusting a man whose name they didn't know. He drove through streets he had traveled 1,000 times, but now each turn felt like a choice that mattered. Each stop was a gamble between safety and disaster. Samuel returned home only to open his door again, turning his quiet house into a shelter. He boiled water, rationed food, told stories to frighten children with a voice that refused to shake. He had lived long enough to know that fear grows louder in silence, and sometimes the strongest weapon is a calm word spoken at the right time. By nightfall, the city no longer resembled itself. Power failed, the sky glowed an unnatural red. And still, ordinary people kept moving. They formed lines without being asked. They shared food they couldn't afford to lose. They carried strangers as if they were kin. No one felt extraordinary while it was happening. Destiny does not announce itself. It disguises itself as urgency, as responsibility, as the simple belief that someone has to act, and that someone might as well be you. Aisha worked until her arms ached and her voice went hoarse. When she finally sat down, she realized she had saved more people in one day than she had met in weeks. The weight of it settled on her slowly, not as pride, but as a quiet, irreversible change. Daniel parked his bus at dawn, its fuel gone, its seats torn, its windows cracked. People stepped off into a fragile morning, alive because he had chosen not to freeze. As he rested his head against the steering wheel, he understood something he had never known before. The path he drove every day had been preparing him for this moment all along. Samuel watched the sun rise over a city that would never again be innocent. He felt grief for what was lost, but also a strange peace. He had always thought his purpose was behind him. Destiny had disagreed. When the world finally slowed enough to breathe, stories began to spread. Not of famous names or grand speeches, but of a woman who tore her own livelihood into bandages, a bus conductor who turned his route into an escape, an old man who transformed his home into hope. History would later reduce the date to dates and numbers. Analysts would argue causes and consequences. But beneath all of that lived the truth that mattered most. The world is shaped not only by the powerful, but by ordinary people who refuse to look away when destiny calls. None of them returned to who they were before. How could they? Once you have faced extraordinary destiny, normal life no longer fits the same way. Yet they didn't seek statues or recognition. They returned to their routines, carrying something invisible but permanent, a knowledge of their own capacity. And perhaps that is the greatest secret history rarely admits. Extraordinary destiny does not belong to the chosen few. It waits quietly, patiently, for ordinary people to rise, not because they want to be remembered, but because in that moment, doing nothing is no longer an option. That is how legends are truly born, not in palaces or prophecy, but in the hearts of everyday people who step forward when the world needs them most.